It's 2 in the morning. Now is probably not the time to be making this video, but this subject is on my mind right now, so I'm gonna give it a go anyway. The subject of this video is going to be about the meaningful or meaninglessness of life, and it's a question that people often seem to ask or think about when they think about the bigger, deeper questions of life. People say, does life have a purpose? Does life have a meaning? And a few days ago, I was part of a sort of meetup group, philosophy meetup group, which met up through Zoom. And some of these issues got brought up, and there was some of the usual kind of contradictions or misunderstandings by a lot of the people, some of the people in the group. And I think the thing that always seems to be the case is no one really knows what they're saying when they say life has meaning or life has no meaning. And I think what the reason behind this is that framework, that way of conceptualizing things, that's what has no meaning. Does life have meaning? Does life not have meaning? I think the question itself is what has no meaning. And whether or not life does or doesn't have meaning, it's not a question that makes any sense. You look at a round basketball, it's a round ball, and you ask someone, do you like the square? Do you like the squareness of the ball? And do you like the squareness of the ball or do you not? Well, neither, because the ball isn't square. So the question doesn't really mean anything, and there's no right or wrong answer to it because the question is flawed. So what does it mean? Why do people ask this so much? I think what they mean is, what they're trying to say is a variety of things. One of those things is the suffering in life worth it? Is there something that makes life worth suffering for? Or all the things that I struggle for day after day, whatever those things are, whatever the things are that you constantly are struggling for, whatever that is, whether it's trying to get more pleasure, whether it's trying to help others, whether it's trying to build a legacy for yourself to be remembered, whatever it is, the question is this all for something that matters? But what does that mean, something that matters? What it means is they're asking, does it matter in a way that I can't even conceptualize? Does it matter beyond blank? So, for example, if you're building towards, you want to build let's say you want to build the highest building. You want to be the architect for the tallest building ever built. Let's just say that was your goal. And then you can come up with reasons for doing it. Maybe you like fame, you want money, whatever it is, you want to be remembered. And then those reasons seem like, oh, fame's not as good as I thought. The money doesn't make me as happy as I thought it would. Being remembered doesn't seem like it really, I'll be gone anyway, who cares if I'm remembered? So it's the reasons you have for doing something don't seem to be worth that thing. Now, but does that really make sense, though, in the way that people try to say things like, does life or does something have meaning and purpose? See, when you say, does life have it, in that broader context, it becomes confusing because you're trying to group everything together. Individual actions, individual thoughts, feelings, anything that makes up life has meaning given what you value or don't value about those moments. It's a subjective experience. And it does, because something subjective doesn't mean it exists any more or less than anything else. If I love a song, and you can say, well, it's my subjective taste, you can't prove that it's an amazing song, right? That doesn't make the song inherently any less valuable, or we could call it even meaningful, to me. But this is where the problem comes in, is because people I think it's because of the way people want their lives to feel ordered, or the way questions and answers apply to other areas of life. They want it to apply to this sort of bigger picture thing that we can't even conceptualize what that means. The bigger picture of, does the entirety of the game of living mean something else beyond whatever? I do this because it makes me happy. I do this because I get a good feeling. I do this thing because it reminds me of my childhood when I have fond memories of that. Whatever it is, helping other people gives me a sense of peace. That is meaningful because you feel like it has value. Meaning, something being meaningful, what it really is, what people really mean when they say that, is doing this thing is valuable to me. And when you say, does life have meaning? Does life have purpose? And you're asking it in a broader context as if it can exist outside your own subjectivity, you're asking, can you prove somehow that there's some sort of objective way to measure what one ought to be doing with their time, and that it leads to something that we all should agree is the ultimate good? And for some reason, when we can't prove this, the kind of easy, quick thing that people fall back on, life is meaningless. Life is meaningless. And I get it. I've said that before. But eventually I realized life is meaningless didn't mean anything. It's the quick knee-jerk reaction to a question that's just confusing enough, just meaningful enough that seems like it's touching on something deep and profound, but it's touching on nothing at all. It's touching on nothing at all. The question itself is what's empty, not life. Now, this doesn't mean that you still might not say, I think life is shit. I think the suffering is not worth it. Everyone, you'll have your own opinion on that. But the real obvious emptiness, I believe, exists in the framework of the question, the way we try to conceptualize life as being meaningful or meaningless. It's the idea that there should be some ultimate authority that can tell us clearly the exact right decision, that there's some way to know the exact right choice to make, the exact right things to value and pursue. And if someone can't lay that out, then life is just meaningless. When we know that's not true. Because what happens is these same people who say this, they'll say, it's death that makes life meaningless. Not all of them, but many of them. Many of them, they will either allude to or directly state that it's death that makes life meaningless. This makes no sense. The fact that one would be concerned about death at all, I would argue, is proof enough that life has meaning, that life has purpose or value, or whatever word, whatever synonym you want to use to, in place of I care about this, I like this, I value this, I want this, I desire this. The fact that one would even begin to think of death as proof of life's meaninglessness is proof alone that life is not meaningless. Otherwise, we would all laugh. We would all laugh in the face of death, because that would be just as meaningless as anything else. And what would it matter? But the reason why we don't want to die is because we find meaning in various moments in our life. We don't want to stop having those moments, even if sometimes they can be few and far between. Now, some might argue, well, it's a biological instinct to survive. Or some might say it's not about the things you enjoy, it's just the fear of the unknown. But a lot of people who would say this are very confident that there is no afterlife, so there would be nothing to fear in just basic non-existence. If you're convinced that there's no afterlife, what's to fear? The only thing to fear or feel sad about is that you find meaning in life, and there's a pain in knowing that you may never be able to have those experiences again. That you want to keep having that moment, those moments you have, the laughter you have with a friend, an experience you have with a loved one, where you're sharing in a moment, sharing some sort of joy. Okay? And I think we often make the mistake of realizing the fake aspects of social constructs with life being inherently meaningless. Meaning, when we are told, this is where some irony comes in again. When we are told, or it's implied, that there is a somewhat objective purpose or meaning to life, whether it's implied that it's all about looks and fame or money, whether it's all implied that it's all about being religious. It doesn't matter whether it's spiritualism, consumerism, either way, whatever it is, if it doesn't resonate with us the way mainstream culture defines meaning, purpose, what's good in life, or our community, if that doesn't resonate with us, the reaction is, oh, life is meaningless. But it's not life that is meaningless. It's that the way a society has constructed itself is in a way that doesn't suit your wants, your needs, your desires. It's like if someone's falsely accused of a crime and they spend 50 years in jail. It's not that life is meaningless in that situation. It's that a severe and atrocious injustice was done. And on a smaller level, what I'm doing is I'm comparing that to when you're not falsely accused of a crime and sent to jail, but you're born into a society or a culture that lives in a way that promotes values that on a lesser level than a literal jail, to a lesser degree, obviously, enslaves you. Where what you're told you need to do, what you feel pressure to do, or in some cases might actually just simply have to do in order to avoid fundamental aspects of life suffering, feels unsatisfying, feels like the suffering isn't worth the reward. And I am not minimizing the fact that sometimes the suffering of life for an individual might not have been worth the reward. I can't decide that for them because it's a subjective judgment. But if someone says that that's the case for them, I'm not going to try to prove otherwise, because suffering is a subjective experience, and I will never fully know what someone else's suffering is like, no matter how hard they try to describe it to me. I won't be able to know for sure. I can't really know how that feels compared to my own. To one person, a certain kind of emotional pain might feel 10 times worse than some of the worst kinds of physical pain. My point being that about the subjective nature of suffering. But let's get back on track. What I'm trying to say is that we often break through, we sort of see through certain aspects of inauthenticity and lies. And I've kind of explained this before when it comes to other things, whether it's about, politics or whatever else. And we see the light, we see through bullshit. But sometimes what we forget to realize, what we forget to understand, is we might be buried deep under 10 layers of bullshit. And just because we pulled through one and see the light towards the 9th layer of bullshit, there might be at least 9 more layers to pull through. And it's hard to really know, and maybe we never really can stop pulling through those layers in a complex society where we've been told a lot of messages from a very young age about any given subject. A lot of conflicting and contradicting messages. A lot of half-truths. But what we have the tendency to do is when we see a big lie, a big deception, a big part of society that is so thoroughly convinced of something that is untrue, that we discover is untrue, we're very quick to jump either towards the opposite of that or to some other simplistic or quick response. So we see, you know what? Everything people told me about this, worry about this, work really hard to accomplish this, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. And then we start saying, wait a second. I don't have to live my life that way. I don't have to define success the way you tell me to. I don't have to perceive relationships, love, anything the way you or 10 million or 10 billion, doesn't matter, people told me to. Just because 1 or 2, or it doesn't matter the numbers, doesn't matter how many people said it, doesn't make it true. But what happens is you see that, and then for some people, myself included at various points in life, it's, oh well, this is all meaningless. No, it's the way that some people try to impose values, impose ideas, or even cliches about the way life should or does work that you don't feel, that doesn't resonate with you, that doesn't reflect any version of reality that you know. And the gut instinct might be to say, well, this whole thing is meaningless. This whole thing has no point. And so you might say, well, does it have a point? And you have to ask yourself, what conditions would have to exist to make it have a point? Is it the impermanence? Are you sure? If life went on forever, would that make it all of a sudden have a point? What would the point then be? He who has the most money wins. He who owns the most property. He who suffers the least. What would be? And then how would we determine the winner? And would there be a clear point? And how would you define that? How would you define it? How would you measure it? Who would decide the point? How could you prove it? And you couldn't. So the problem is you can't even really conceptualize, I don't believe, in a consistent and honest way on what some sort of obvious objective purpose or meaning of life could be, whether we were immortal or not. And once again, I feel like this is more evidence that it's the question itself that is meaningless. Life is meaningful insofar as we care about things. That is what it means for something to be meaningful. And yes, life can be meaningless in that sense if you cease to care about anything. But as long as there's at least one thing you care about in life, anything at all that you care about, anything that moves you on any level, if there's one thing that inspires you for half a second, it is impossible to be convinced that life is meaningless.
I never know what I want. You always say that I'm always wrong. Hey, rise and shine, 'cause all the time you want what's mine. We never kissed goodbye, 'cause I know you come moon.